Hello, everybody. I am Robert Hawes, CEO and founder of Ephemeral Research. And today we're going to be taking a quick look at an earlier project of mine that's centered around orchestration systems with Agentic automation. This is a project called IntelliGox. I'm actually pretty impressed with how this turned out. When I was first learning about autonomous systems, the very first thing I was looking at was trying to understand what an agent was. That quickly led into harnesses, and then harnesses led into pipelines and workflows, and that eventually led into orchestration systems. The idea behind this is that since I come from a background that's not like product development centric, like I'd never really deployed applications at scale or really anything beyond just simple like Python scripts or Bash scripts or any type of like limited scripting capability to perform some type of task. Maybe I built some like minimal kernel drivers for some kernel research, but outside of that, it's not really. I've never had a full-fledged like product development background, and I wanted to see how far we could really push these coding agents like Claude, Codex, and things of that nature. And so the idea behind this was to see, okay, can I basically just give an entire system, bypass permissions, give Claude everything it needs, and see how far I can get by building an orchestration system and really building an end-to-end solution to where I could say, hey, build me an application for this, and it's able to then work on standing up its ephemeral environments, running evals, making sure the features are all being created properly. And like, how do you go from a single concept or prompt, distill that out into an entire project where the system's deciding, okay, what kind of agents do we need for this project? What type of specs do we need for this project? What are the features we need to implement? All from just a simple base prompt, right? Like that's the idea. The user is not someone who has a super product background. They just have ideas and they want to see those ideas come to life. And right now there's a lot of frontier labs and everyone's like working on creating this, and they've already created it for some things. But you can do this yourself too. Like, you don't have to rely upon the frontier labs to give you these capabilities. What do I mean by that? Well, if you want to run local models and you want to be able to have your own development practice on-prem, whether you're an enterprise or another, just a person who wants to keep your information private, you can develop the same capabilities the frontier labs have by just working through and trying to build it yourself and using the AI models to help guide you through the process, right? So I'm going to walk through some of what IntelliGox is, and then I'm going to show you like an example project I built with end-to-end for Android APK development. And it's meant to show like a demo prototype, like, hey, like someone can take this idea and run with it to as far as they want to go, right? And a lot of people are working on building these systems, and they're a lot of fun. I mean, you're going to run into a lot of problems, a lot of testing, a lot of trialing. You're going to figure out, like, how do you want to handle parallelization? How do you handle multiple recursion of subagents being called? Do you really want to do you want to have to be the one who's assigning, end cases for recursion, or do you want the system to be able to figure out like how to do that itself, right? Because like the idea here is I can give a prompt, walk away completely out of the loop, not even involved, and come back to a fully working product that has features already created, has working evals, proof that everything was completed. It stood up a real environment, built the code, built the product, tested it, took screenshots, videos, everything it needs. That's all done autonomously. Like, the human does not need to be in this experience anymore. And I know it's scary to think about, but this really proves the point, is like, the future is not the future. The future we're envisioning, where everyone's talking about, like developers and engineers and all these people are no longer confined to a desk and having to think about how to design all these applications and products. We can literally hand that knowledge off to the agents, and the agents can perfectly fine go out and build everything you need. That is not the future. That is now. And so if you're an enterprise and you're trying to figure out like how do we approach this, I mean, I'll be honest, it is very difficult because it's scary because once you've seen the capability, you cannot unsee it. Like, I want to make that clear. Once you've seen a system build itself, create its own knowledge store, distill its own pipeline, create its own tasks, create its own features, eval everything, QA itself, build it inside of its own ephemeral environment to make sure it's actually working, and then you just come back and everything works as you intended, it really kind of changes the scope of things. And it's a lot of fun, I'll be honest. It is a lot of fun to build these. So, without further ado, let's kind of dive into my MVP prototype-esque type of adventure I had here. And let's look at this. So, this is kind of just an overview page. Not really anything special here. I mean, essentially, if you're running this as like a distributed system where you have 30 or 40 or 50 or 100 different servers, the idea is that you can integrate all of that information for your entire business running into one panel. And this is your overview. I mean, the closest thing that I'm thinking about when I look at this is like maybe something from like OpenAI's Frontier where they're trying to capture enterprise. But I'm not sure like large enterprise is going to want to hand over all their sensitive information directly to a third party. Right? They're going to want to be able to have that information in-house, internally, and have their own systems deploying it. That is my assumption. I could be wrong. I'm sure smaller businesses will gladly, just if they're able to, due to regulation or compliance, things aren't as strict on them as maybe other industries. But if their industry allows for it and they're able to, smaller businesses might just opt into those Frontier Labs overview orchestration, type of systems that are pre-built for them. But larger enterprise, probably not. So the vision here is that, you're a large corporation, large enterprise, and you need a central location of how you can see all of your different, products being built, and really anything. It doesn't have to be product development. And I'll demo another product tomorrow that I built that's more generative UI based. I learned about that term the other week, and it's not new. It's been around for a long time, but I wanted to be able to create something like that myself locally. And so essentially like just imagine I'll demo the product tomorrow or something and create a video for it, but essentially like you just have all of your business operations information inside of this chat app, and it's able to build on demand UI using like data visualization techniques to be able to tell a story, to answer questions based off of actual factual data that you provided, right? And I'm sorry, I'm going on a little side tangent here, but it's really crazy what people are able to achieve and what you're able to do with some of this agentic AI capabilities. But let's dive back into IntelliGox though. The overview page, like I've said before, this is like, imagine you just have like hundreds and hundreds of servers and this is all distributed and you need like an overview central location of where you're seeing your essential agent workforce operating, right? No humans in the loop here. You're one person controlling thousands and thousands of agents doing all kinds of different enterprise activities and behavior. Not just product development. We'll make that clear. You have the ability though to create a new job. Like I said, pretty simple here. Like right here, they want to create a simple CRM dashboard. That surfaces churn risk in under 10 seconds, integrates with Stripe and HubSpot, works offline, and all kinds of other stuff. Check the quality bar, the domain you want to operate in. If you're building an agent, if you want to work with data, if you're trying to do some research type of stuff, systems, if you want to dive into security, if you're building out like infrastructure. There's like this concept of like infrastructure as code and everything like that. Like a lot of that, all of that stuff can now be built with like agents. It's really crazy. Like you just give like Claude or Codex or build your own agent, and you just give it raw shell access. Most of these models understand like terminal commands very, very well. So, it's really crazy. We have here too, like different configurations. You can set how much money you want to spend per budget, per phase. Drift policy, once again, drift. We can cover this for a second, but essentially, when you're trying to have like a fully autonomous orchestration system and everything's just running at once and you have parallel, the same problems that happen in normal business happen in agentic systems, right? It's instead of it being like called drift, it might be like, business, group alignment issues where like you have this division in a group and their initial task from the leadership was to, figure out, let's just create an example, like why is the sky, blue and not red or something, right? And then 3 months go by, you're trying to get information about the status of that project, and you find out that they're working on trying to figure out, how to make quantum computing work at scale. So you're just trying to figure out, okay, where did we go wrong and how, right? That's essentially drift. And the reason for that's because when you're having the ability to spawn new agents and you have to provide that initial prompt or context, the system is doing all that for us, right? Like all we assign is an initial goal, right? This is it. Come back hours later, a day later, and whatever you wanted to have completed is completed. But you're going to be calling hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sub-agents, and, it can really, like, imagine the game Telephone, right? And somewhere along that line, someone changed something in the message, and it completely got transformed by the time your original message gets back to you. The same thing here, like, when you're calling these sub-agents, you need to keep track of context. You need to think of a way to make sure that context is aligned with the phase, with the goal. Like, what's the scope here? Like, is this like a, team member to team member context alignment? Is this a team member to manager alignment? Is this a team member manager to, senior manager alignment? Like, all that context matters, right? So you're essentially just automating business communication, right? Just think about it. We need to make sure that the communication between agents is solid. Same thing in a business, right? So that's drift, right? Because if you have an agent who takes in context that's not correct, that's based on a prior sub-agent's call and summary of their output, that could throw off the complete rest of your entire project. And that's difficult to solve. It's not, at least for me, it's pretty difficult. But yeah, I just want to cover that really quick. That's drift. And drift is a very real thing. So I have mine set to warn because sometimes in some parts of projects, I'm not too worried about drift. It's not that big of a deal. There's a weighting system to where 0 to 100, depending on the type of drift that occurs, because I have a context analyzer that analyzes the summary outputs, the phase alignment, the overall goal alignment, the agent to agent alignment, just like in business. And it's all weighted though. So depending on the performance or the output of that context of the prior sub-agent, if it's out of alignment and it's really bad, and it goes from like 100 down to like 40, well, all of a sudden it's going to do a hard realign. And the system will then try to re-inject the proper context to keep the system going. But if it's not able to do that, it has to halt the project, right? And so when a project gets halted, it's not running right now to show you, but there's like a drop down pop up at the top of the screen that then shows you, hey, this project stopped and halted. Here's the drift warning, and here's why. We tried to fix it. The system tried to fix itself, but it failed, and it needs you, the operator, to look at why it failed. That's the only way I've figured out so far to approach that context drift, where you have hundreds and hundreds of agents running, recursively calling sub-agents, and we're not defining the end result for that sub-agent recursion loop. We're not. The system has to decide that. But it's interesting to think about. that problem. Let's see what else we got here. We got running projects. We have some recent projects. Basically, I was dog fooding itself, trying to build itself, and it worked for the most part, which is pretty crazy. Like I said before, we have this Android application project here I built, which is just a clone of Flappy Bird, but I built it and everything works well. So let's look at jobs real quick. Let's take a look at this Android one. Here we get a quick little overview here, and the UI for all this can always change. I'm not a UI person. Someone out there is probably gonna be looking at this and being like, "Oh, this is horrendous." I don't blame you. I'm not a UI or user experience type of person. This is one of my earlier projects too, but I just wanted to share it. So, like I said before, we have the initial job that gets created, right? So our prompt, and we can see here at the top, there's 19 pipelines created, 73 phases, and 39 agents to create a very basic Flappy Bird clone. Our prompt was everything above the Android build profile. And this is one of those things I was talking about earlier, was like, how do we get the system to dynamically allocate an ephemeral environment to build everything that we want to build for whatever application or product type we're trying, right? So if we're trying to build a web application, or we're trying to build some complete infrastructure, how do we give the system the proper tools to understand how to deploy that environment? That's important. I think that's what a lot of frontier labs are looking at. I could be wrong, but getting that fully automated is going to be interesting, because at that point, think about the vision. Think about what this means, right? So I was saying this earlier, like, the future is not the future. The future is now. And once you've seen this, there is no going back. This starts asking some very difficult questions in business. Is like, what does the future really look like, right? Because when we're able to, deploy this at scale in an enterprise where you essentially have entire groups of business, like, there's a lot of people doing manual work right now, manually looking at tickets, manually looking at, QA testing, manually developing products, manually writing code, all of this stuff. But once you've seen the system do it end to end on its own, the question changes from, okay, this isn't the future, it's now. How do we build this out further? Right? How do we take this and just go all out with it and see how far we can push it, right? And that's what I'm really interested about. That's what I'm really, really curious about. But look here. So, like, the Android build profile, everything above that, I prompted it myself. That was the goal, right? We didn't mention Flappy Bird, but you'll see later on, I'm pretty sure this was trained on Flappy Bird, or Flappy Bird was somewhere, and it quickly realized that we're building a Flappy Bird clone. But the Android build profile, target API level, AVD device, language, UI framework, it even starts it in headless emulator mode, and eval capture, which is basically just using screenshots to verify feature works. And what does that mean, though? So the environment that this is using Docker, right? And Docker has all of the build information inside of a Docker image for building the application. The AVD emulator, though, runs on the host, right? And so the Docker container has all the build information, and the AVD emulator is on the host, and essentially the agent, like Claude, whenever it's being called during this pipeline process recursively through all these different pipelines, is going to then use ADB and AVD via direct shell access. So I give it access to a terminal, and it's able to install the application, start the application, trigger features, click the screen, do different things, and take screenshots and do complete eval to make sure all the stuff works. isn't that like just mind-boggling? like, like when I prompted this, I went to sleep. Literally, I just kicked this off, went to bed, came back, and it was done, fully working. There's clearly some bugs here though. Like I don't know why I created a whole bunch of like pipeline v0, v1, all this stuff. But we can like drill into each one, right? So let's see here. Let's go to pipeline v0. We can see here generation, and this stuff, like I said before, the UI and everything, this can all be fixed easily. It's just literally just a prompt and change it all out and all that stuff. But this is interesting. So this is like the structured output of the very first pipeline. You know, we see that it used 30,000 tokens. Confidence is high that it all, you know, went well for that pipeline. Cost summary. You know, generated 7-phase Android pipeline for a Flappy Bird style side scroller game using Kotlin Compose, single track implementation per Android constraints with eval captured QA and bug fix iteration. So we went from like our prompt to now having it distill all these other steps autonomously, agentically, just using Claude. Like this is, it's really mind-boggling, you know. And it went through and built out the phases for us, like the phase summary. You know, Kotlin plus Jetpack Compose targeting API 34. The game has a player that falls due to gravity, jumps on tap, and must navigate through gaps between top-bottom obstacles that scroll horizontally toward the player. Collision ends the game. Passing obstacles increases score. Like I didn't even mention score, but you know, it just knows how to do this. Key features decomposed, project scaffold via Android scaffold.py, game loop coroutine timing, player physics, obstacle generator with random gap positions, horizontal scrolling via canvas compose offset, collision detection, player rec versus obstacle recs, score tracking, display, game over, restart UI. Then it goes into scaffolding even more. Resource estimates was saying, hey, we're going to need like seven sequential agents, 1 peak concurrent VM, 3 to 5 minutes first Gradle build, 30 seconds subsequent builds, estimated $12 in tokens. No browser testing. Android domain uses AVD based eval instead. Like I said before, the agents know how to, or the LLMs know how to use terminal commands, and they were probably trained on like ADB and AVD, so it's probably in their training data. So if you didn't want to use Claude Code, you want to use a local agent you built yourself using tool calls and everything, they know, like the training data has the terminal commands for how to use AVD, how to use ADB. So you can emulate all of the QA people. This is mind-boggling. Right? So then you look at like pipeline plan. It distills all this information for us. And we can go on and on. There's a lot we could look at here, but let's look at some of these other ones like spec analysis. Let's look at that. So pipeline 9, spec analysis, spec analyzer. And this is like kind of the structured result I was talking about. It builds this stuff out. Findings, these are, I guess, are bugs it found for things not working properly, or these might be feature requests it wants to add. Not entirely sure. Let's see what else we got here. See, cycle reviewer. Contracts. Okay, yeah, so contracts. Let's cover that really quick. So for some reason it didn't really run in this issue here, but contracts are related to the evals. And the evals are essentially just proof, you know, everything's working as it's supposed to. So like launch side scroller, you know, the sub agents take a screenshot of the AVD emulator before and then after, you know, initial HUD. This is the game. Tap to start. It taps the screen, sends the shell command, ADB shell command to do that. You know, the game starts. You know, flap one time, so it presses one time, and then, you know, you run into the first obstacle. Afterwards, you restart. Flap one again. Flap two. We made it a little bit further that time. and then running HUD. Let's see, what other type of features did it do? Let's see, restart. What does this mean? So start, the game starts, wait to die. So it just waits till you run into something, and then it triggers the game restart. So tap to restart, restarts the screen, and you go back to the beginning. After restart, this is what it looks like. So yeah, so I mean, it does all this for us, right? And hopefully you're able to see like what I'm seeing here. Like this is just a very basic demo built in like literally. I added the AVD environment and the Android development environment in like an hour. But you can do this for any type of ephemeral environment you want to create and deploy. You see what I'm saying? Like this is beyond just a single application use case, right? We can really drive this as far as we want with as much as we want to be able to achieve. And that's hopefully what I hope you all are able to see here. Like what I'm looking at is, we can develop products, right? But when you have a fully agentic system that has access to everything, that runs into the same type of problems you run into in normal businesses, right? Communication, drift. That's just a prime example. That's alignment with your teams executing. You know, CEO gives a task to a CTO. CTO gives a task to a CISO. The CISO then sends that down the VPs, the directors, the managers, and everything else like that. That's literally just the recursion of the sub-agents calling and making sure, hey, are we all aligned on a project, right? And then if not, if alignment fails in the business, it fails in your orchestration system, well, you have drift and alignment, and you have to refix that. So we're able to automate and change how business runs for a decent portion of the staff. This will free up their time to then be able to be more creative and think of how to drive value in a much different manner in the future. Because I'm not the only person who has these ideas. I'm not. I know I'm not. I've seen other people do similar projects. I've seen it. The future, what I'm trying to really stress here is that the future is not some abstract concept of what we might think it looks like. The future is already here. It's just how do we get this into the right environment? How do we get it to the right people who have the right capital, the right resources, to where we're able to then take the concept and really apply it at scale and see what this turns into. That's the big goal here. Like, how do we take this and revolutionize business across the world? And someone will get that opportunity. I hope I'm able to be a part of that journey. But someone is going to have the task assigned to them, and they're going to be given the resources and the proper teams and budgets and capital and everything else to revolutionize business across the world. And it's crazy to think about. It really is. All right, let's look at some of the other stuff here, right? So resources, like I mentioned before, that this is a distributed system, and you're running, thousands of agents across hundreds and hundreds of servers. You need a way to keep track of what all is actually happening here, right? And then knowledge base. So like I said before, these orchestration systems mimic real businesses very well. What do all businesses have? They have an internal KB. They have an internal knowledge base where they're like, hey, we onboard someone new. We've encountered 50 different problems during onboarding. We have a knowledge base that outlines the proper standard operating procedure, the SOPs. Just take SOPs and assign them with a different name for the orchestration as a knowledge store, right? It's exactly the same concept. The system ran into a problem. It identified and said, hey, this is wrong. We need to do it differently in the future, right? So now, if we ever do another project for Android, we can go to these Android problems, and we can see hey, this issue, if this ever comes up in a relational context again for a sub-agent, lazy load this into the context so that we do not run into this problem again. Right? The same concept in business as a standard operating procedure. The reason the business made that SOP is because they most likely ran into a problem and they needed to document how to handle that procedure to prevent it from being the issue repeating itself. The same thing with the orchestration system. The exact same. I'm pretty impressed with this. I think it's really neat that the system, basically got this working to where it's able to just create its own standard operating procedure and learn from every single action. Logs, you're able to see everything that's going on across everything. So you want observability and you want to see what's occurring at a high level, and then if you want to drill down deeper, you can. Like I said before, people talk about observability being a problem with, agentic systems. It's not the observability that's a problem. The problem is big data. Because if you start scaling this to like hundreds and hundreds or tens and 20 and 30,000 agents, that's going to be a lot of telemetry data that you're going to have to store somewhere and be able to look through really quickly. And yeah, I just think that's interesting to think about. We take one problem, observability, and then we just refactor that into the real problem. And the real problem is like, okay, how do we handle all this data? Right? Cost. This is important too. Like if you're a business, like I said, the future is never the future. The future is here in front of us today, this very moment. We just haven't realized it yet to see the future that's already here. So the way I'm thinking about this is cost analysis. If businesses, change drastically, and they're all running their own orchestration systems, they're all running their own agentic internal solutions that are piloting their entire business, they need to have a central source of truth for how much is it costing us, right? This is a big one. You want a breakdown. This is what this could be. You could see your per job cost breakdown by domain, by models. If you have local models, you can probably factor in costs differently because you own the hardware and the infrastructure and the energy costs and everything else. But this is essentially what that's supposed to be. Templates. These are just job descriptions, right? That's all it is for your entire business. In the system, the orchestration system, just as in a normal business that exists today, the business runs into a problem and it says, oh, we need someone who can solve this problem. So you create a job description and then you post it online. That same concept is here with these pipeline templates. So the system, as it's executing and figuring out like how it's going to distill the tasks in the pipeline, the phases to complete the original goal, is going to dynamically allocate a job description, right? And that job description is then fed into the pipeline. The same thing business does. The exact same. It already does. QA, this is probably going to go away because it's not really needed anymore. But when I was dog fooding the system, for some reason it just added this QA page and all these different test suites because at the time it was running see here, CDP browser QA view. It was just adding it all here for some reason, but this can just be deleted. Browser. This is the VM browser. Live agent terminals. So in business, and even today, like I said, the future is never the future. It's just how you see things, right? And I'm not saying that this is the de facto. What I'm saying is that this is how I see things. In normal business, they have ways of tracking what their team members are doing, the employees are doing, right? It could be monitoring with desktop monitoring software on their laptops or endpoint devices to keep track and see what they're doing. Like if you had a micromanaging boss and they wanted to see what you're doing at 2:00 in the afternoon on a Friday, they would pull up your laptop and see, oh, they're not really doing anything. They've just been it's been on the same page for like 7 hours. That Same capability, once again, that exists today in business exists in the orchestration system. Because when you have thousands of agents and they're running per projects, let's say you just wanted to take a gander. You wanted to see, like, hey, what are these agents up to? What are they doing? You know, you can click into here and it pulls up a live TMUX session of the terminal as executing and the tasks it's performing. You could see it live. And at any moment, you could just be like, all right, let's stop it, right? And you take over, and then you resume session back to the agent or something. This also ties into some of the drift. Like if it halts, you then come here to fix the halt, right? That's kind of the idea here. And then config is just, how, configuration and settings and everything else for the actual system itself. But, I this is just, it really blows my mind if I think about it, because people, if you are employed and you have a job and it's a knowledge-based work where you get paid a lot of money because of your knowledge and you're not diving into AI, I would be extremely concerned. If you're curious about these things, try to build these systems yourself. All right, start out with an agent, go to a harness, go to pipelines, workflows, look into orchestration systems. Don't rely upon frontier labs carrying us into the future. All right? I know it's easy to just go pay them money and use their subscription. I know this. But just try to build the stuff yourself. Think creatively about a problem and how you're going to approach it. That's going to be an extremely valuable skill set. Is like, hey, the future, and it's like I've been saying this entire time. The future is never the future. It's already here. We just haven't realized it yet, right? We just haven't opened our eyes and really opened our vision to be able to see what's in front of us. So, in this future that's happening now, AI is giving people the ability to build and create things who never had that capability. They never have. But you know what they do have? They have the ability to think creatively. They have a large imagination. They can look at a problem and think about different ways to solve it that aren't coming from a place of preconditioned ideas or thoughts of how to solve that problem. Right? You want to have those same skill sets. You want to be able to use the tools to create solutions that are creative, drive value, that are tied to real actual meaningful things in a future where AI basically eliminates majority of knowledge-based work. All right? It's pretty scary to think about, but it's what I believe. You have to believe this way, I believe. And if you're truly diving into the agentic systems and you want to see how far these systems to go, you need to go AI pilled to the max. You gotta go deep and just accept the reality for what it is and take steps forward and build. Like, this is my vision. My vision is that you have this central enterprise location that doesn't want to give up all their information to the frontier labs. They're going to deploy this all internally themselves. I want to see that future. I want to be a part of that future. I want to help build and develop the capability of what it looks like when we revolutionize business across the world. Kind of a strange presentation, but it's already here, right? I've shown you all. Like if you go look at Google Gemini, they give you the ability to develop applications in the cloud on their services. If you go to Claude Security, they move their Claude Security into the cloud, into their own environment, infrastructure, and it's their own orchestration system that's running behind the hood, is my assumption, right? And they move it there because that's their capability. They don't want to bake that into a binary application to deploy onto everybody's endpoint because somebody would go reverse engineer that really easily, right? I'm not saying it's impossible to reverse engineer something where you only have access to a client, right? You still can. People still reverse engineer back-end game servers all the time from just having a client, but it's a lot more difficult, right? So what I'm saying is that the future is already here. If you're a business and people are telling you this can't be done, you've seen it. If you watch this whole video, I showed you end-to-end product development. And it goes beyond just product development. How you see this and how you implement this and deploy it is going to revolutionize everything about your business. It really is. And, I think that a lot of people are nervous of what the future looks like who work in a industry or a career where their entire high-paying career job is tied to knowledge scarcity. Because now we can have an orchestration system be created that can basically do everything that they can do. And that's an identity crisis. I'm not saying that lightheartedly. That this is a very, very tough thing to accept, right? And I'll be honest. I'll be the first to say it. Cybersecurity. I spent a decade in cybersecurity. Reverse engineering, writing exploits, doing, all that fun stuff. Worked with some really, really smart people in the entire world, like some of the best in the world. It just blows my mind. Some of the blessings I've experienced in my life. But when I was able to create like a very rudimentary pipeline to do the same type of vulnerability research I would do on a code base, whether it's open source or just a raw binary, and able to discover real vulnerabilities, it really changed kind of the economic unit of vulnerability research or cybersecurity in general. Because the assumptions are always that it takes someone highly technical and highly skilled to find these vulnerabilities. But when you can pay, $50 to $100 and get capabilities and find vulnerabilities that you would have to pay if you were a business thousands and thousands of dollars for. And it's always scoped. Every engagement for a product is scoped. So you have like 2 weeks and you get like this really refined scope. But now businesses have the ability to scale that as far as they can see, as much as they want to. And it really changed my view on things. I accepted it, Cybersecurity, it's never been 100% successful at any time. And businesses know this already. All the AI orchestration has to do is be just as effective as a manual team at a fraction of the cost. And, if the companies build it themselves, they have full control over the system. This applies to any business, industry, any, not just cybersecurity, but any. But I appreciate you listening. If you watched this whole video and you were able to see some of the concepts we baked into a telegox, I think it's pretty cool what I put here. Like I said, just try to envision this. Open Frontier or OpenAI Frontier, they're designing this right now as we speak. They're trying to figure out how to get this into enterprise. I'm here to tell you, I'll build you the same thing for your business, and you have full control over all your stuff. If you have the capital, the infrastructure, if you have the ability to see the vision that I'm seeing, and you have people who want to build this too, let's build this. Let's revolutionize businesses and how they operate across the world. Let's automate as much as we can. I don't see why we can't. I really don't. I don't see why we don't have a future where we just automate all the development. Engineering, we automate all of it. Generative UIs, on-demand interfaces, we have those capabilities now. Let's figure out what we can do and build. And build today. Build the future that's already here today. That's pretty much it. Wish you all the best. And once again, my name is Robert Hawes, CEO and founder of Obsidian Research. And y'all take it easy. I wish you all the best.